Welcome to A Healer in Every Home. My name is Burke Lenihan from the Lydian Center for Innovative Healthcare in Cambridge, Mass. And today we're very, very fortunate to have with us Dr. Emily Chan, visiting us from Laguna Beach, California, and here to talk to us about anxiety and stress and natural ways you can relieve them. So maybe you could explain to us what actually goes on in the brain when somebody's stressed out or anxious.
All the blood flow would go to the parts of the brain that have to do with survival, like the fight and flight response. So the blood is going to the hypothalamus and the amygdala. It's not really going to the frontal lobe of the brain, which is right up here in the front, where we have logical thinking.
That's where they need to do their job, right? To
that's
please
where
the
they
boss.
have to. Yes, that's
and that's the frontal lobe.
That's what they're medicating kids for with ADHD. Is that they're trying to give them medication to stimulate the frontal lobe. Now, if you think about adults who can't concentrate, if we just think about how stressed they are, if we can get them to be more grounded and calm, a lot more of their blood flow goes to that frontal lobe where they can make decisions quickly. They won't feel as confused.
When people are under stress and they go into fight or flight, and then the blood flow goes to the more primitive part of the brain that would, say in caveman days, help the person run away or something, and the blood flow is not going to the frontal lobe where the kind of the higher order thinking happens that we need for the kind of jobs people are doing in today's society. So I think you're saying that if we could calm this fight or flight stress response naturally, then the blood would naturally go to the front part of the brain and people would naturally be able to concentrate better without taking medication to do it.
Yes.
Which is kind of like double trouble.
Yes.
So what about, can you explain to us in terms of the neurotransmitters, what's going on in these different phases of stress?
Yes, absolutely. What you think changes your body's biochemistry. It changes the chemistry in your brain. So it's really important to have some kind of a control of thoughts in your head. If those thoughts are loving and productive and encouraging to yourself, or if they're thoughts that beat you up or that are based off of a lot of worry and fear, because they change your body, they change your health. So not only does it affect the emotions, it affects your physical health. So I'll talk about one that's pretty famous. It's called cortisol. That chemical gets secreted when you're stressed. And when it gets secreted when you're stressed, it increases your heart rate. It might make your palms feel a little bit more sweaty. You might feel hypoglycemic, low blood sugar. You might feel a little bit shaky too. You might find it really hard to concentrate.
So you don't want that going on when you're trying to get your job done at work,
no,
right?
No, you really don't want that. And that happens when you're stressed. Cortisol gets secreted. Now, another problem is some people don't feel all these physiological responses as if you're nervous getting on stage or something like that. Some people are just chronically stressed. And so they won't feel these symptoms, but the cortisol levels are just kind of slightly elevated above baseline kind of all the time. And what that chronic stress with the elevations of cortisols, what that happens is the body starts to not be able to maintain muscle mass. So the breakdown of the body is faster than the build up. And so they might have flabbier muscles, they might start to gain weight in their abdominal area, they might have more inflammation, aches and pains. So that really promotes more chronic disease with chronically elevated cortisol. And if that goes for too long, the body goes, you know, I can't just sustain this forever. I can't go at 125% all the time. And so after maybe like 2 years or something like that, depends on the patient's body, they'll start to get low levels of cortisol. We call that adrenal fatigue. Then people who are stressed might feel tired and stressed at the same time, and they start to feel really drained kind of constantly.
It's hard to come back from that because it's hard to exercise and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is that people can have this elevated kind of subacute or subclinical, like they don't notice it. What they notice is the effects, like they're gaining weight, they're getting flabby, or they're getting more tired, and people think, I'm getting older and this is normal. And it's not.
It's not.
It's not.
And that's what
it's
we want to really tell people.
That we can fix.
Exactly.
This can be fixed.
Yes.
Yeah. How about another neurotransmitter? What would be another one?
Another one that gets secreted during acute stress, like if you're really nervous, would be adrenaline. So that's epinephrine, norepinephrine. Sometimes I see people who kind of feel that effect right away. If I'm doing a neurotransmitter test, we can actually test these chemicals for my patients. And I see that being high. Another one that can be high is called glutamate. Now, glutamate, don't confuse with glutamine that people take to build muscles or to repair the intestinal tract. They're different. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. And basically what that does is it's like electricity that fires, fire, 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 fire. And you want to know that the opposite of glutamate, the calming side, its flip side, is called GABA. And so usually people who have really high glutamate, they're deficient in GABA.
And can't they also get glutamate from like MSG, for example? There are what are called excitotoxins in foods now that are overstimulating or artificially stimulating people.
So
they're not so good for the brain, I think.
So with neurologically more sensitive individuals, they really feel that reaction with MSG. So sometimes it overstimulates them so much that it shuts down their nervous system. They get really, really tired. Sometimes that happens also. Sometimes people will get super hyper. It just depends on how the person reacts. And so that's why it's really important for us to be able to have some means to test the brain chemicals when working with a patient, because that profile of how they're out of balance can be very different from person to person. A lot of doctors, when people just go in to see their doctor complaining of these things, we'll just give them medications by kind of trial and error, like Xanax or Valiums and Ativans. But the problem with those are they're really addictive. And they don't really solve the root cause of why that person is stressed. And so part of, besides even giving herbs and homeopathy that we do, is also looking at, what is causing that distress, and kind of going deeper into healing maybe some of those childhood issues that might manifest as an adult, and taking care of that as well. That's really important.
Sometimes I have people coming in for anxiety, and I tell them, your prescription is you have to quit your job. But of course, it's not always practical, so we have to give them things to calm them down. What about serotonin? That's associated with depression if people are low in serotonin. Some people are just anxious, and some people are anxious and depressed. And you can tell that from the tests with the serotonin level?
Yes. So with that whole test, they're different brain chemicals altogether, and we can tell that. So sometimes people might have a low serotonin where they feel a little bit depressed. Now, they may not be clinically depressed, but they might feel more sad. They might feel bad about themselves. Some people wake up just feeling that heavy sensation in the chest, or they just feel really heavy, as if, another day, oh no, or so overwhelmed that there's just that burden. So sometimes when people are starting to say that they feel like that, they may not fit all the diagnostic criteria for depression, but if I measure their neurotransmitters, they might show a little lower serotonin. And if I give them some supplements that are supportive of serotonin, such as like 5-HTP or St. John's wort, sometimes that will bring that up, and they'll start to feel a little happier. Oftentimes I do see that depression going along with the anxiety, those symptoms running kind of back and forth quite a lot. Also with depression, I did want to say that some people feel another different type of depression with a lower amount of dopamine. So
what does that feel like?
That sometimes has to do more with motivation. So a lot of times people with lower dopamine levels can have symptoms that are kind of similar to the serotonin, but the way that you work with it is very, very different in support. So it's kind of good to know.
This is reminding me of all the clients I have who are telling me about their college-age sons who are kind of moving back into the family's basement and not applying for a job, and kind of playing video games in the basement, and the parents are asking me, what can we do? Like, he's shy, and how can we get him up and out of the, and get him to apply for a job and get him to kind of move along in life? And I'm wondering whether it might be low dopamine perhaps, or if that would be helpful for the.
Yeah, absolutely. Because very high dopamine, you kind of see that schizophrenic tendency where there's just that obsessiveness and everything. And then when it's lower, you can see sometimes some issues. Now, if it's not too low, sometimes people are still motivated, but it's hard to get to doing it. And once they start doing it, then it's fine. With a really, really low serotonin, sometimes we get the people who just really just want to stay in bed. They're almost apathetic, and they don't enjoy the joys of life. Yeah, they don't enjoy anything. Usually the dopamine, they're kind of sad, but they can still enjoy something. So that's kind of the difference.
Yeah. In my experience in working with clients, I share a lot of clients with naturopaths and functional medicine doctors. And in my experience, the kind of tests that you do are much more subtle, and also you do a wider range of tests, and you look at a different range of what would be normal or what's something you can treat compared to what a conventional medical doctor would look at. So many times my clients have been told by their, what they call their real doctor, that they're fine and there's nothing we can do because you're fine. And then they go to a naturopathic doctor or functional medicine doctor and they get a wider variety of tests, or the doctor's looking at the bell curve of what's normal in a different way. And you gave us the example that it may be that the person's low dopamine may not be severe enough to trigger this full kind of black or white diagnosis. Do you have this kind of depression or not? But even if you don't, you might be in a gray area where it's low, where you would benefit. Like you would actually see a difference from treating the person as if they are depressed. You could move them more towards kind of normalizing their neurotransmitters, let's say.
You just want to move them closer to balance. So for example, a lot of conventional tests for cortisol, if it's too low, then people have Addison's disease. If it's too high, then it's Cushing's disease. But anything in between is still kind of the normal range. But with the testing that I do, it looks at kind of that, instead of the full spectrum, it's kind of more of the narrow piece.
And the proof of the pudding is that you treat those people who are in that gray area. They don't have Cushing's, they don't have Addison's. They're somewhere in between, but you treat them as if they're out of balance and they feel better. So in a way, that's the proof that there was something that could be treated. So now you've told us about that you do this testing.
For the neurotransmitters, we do the saliva and urine, and that's really easy, especially for kids who have some problems in school. Sometimes they're anxious and they also have ADHD, and that's really helpful to do this type of testing. It gives me some information with the supplements. Let's say if somebody's really anxious and they have high amounts of glutamate, that was our excitatory neurotransmitter, and they have not enough GABA. Well, these two play off each other as opposites. And B6, the vitamin B6, is very important because GABA in the chemistry process, you need the glutamate to make the GABA. And B6 is that vitamin that helps push your body to make the GABA. So if you don't have enough B6, too much glutamate, and it stays in glutamate. You add the B6, it pushes it to GABA, which is calming. Now GABA, you might see some GABA supplements on the market as well. GABA really does not cross the blood-brain barrier. With some people though, it works. And the reason why it works is a lot of people who have neurological symptoms have what we call perhaps a more permeable blood-brain barrier. They might have a more permeable intestinal barrier as well, like intestinal permeability, leaky gut. So people who have leaky gut very likely have leaky brain. So that's something Dr. Perlmutter, MD, talks about.
In grain brain, right? Is that right? Yeah.
And so for those people who have leaky gut, leaky brain, sometimes taking GABA works for them, but it also tells us that they might have something else physiological that's out of balance.
Because it shouldn't be working, right? What our viewers could do is go to the health food store and get B6.
You can kind of get a B complex. That sometimes is really good to get the other Bs to
enough?
balance.
Yeah.
I think that that's good to get actually a combination. I use a lot of combinations actually with my patients. So when they mix together, they actually are synergistic with each other. And then one more that I want to tell you about is called phosphatidylserine. So we were talking about the cortisol levels. Now cortisol has different levels in the body during different times of the day. So it follows the circadian rhythm. And cortisol should actually be high during the day and then it drops down at nighttime.
So you can go to sleep,
so you
right?
can go to sleep. And cortisol's not all bad. Some people think of it like a stress chemical, but you need enough cortisol to be able to wake up in the morning. So sometimes there are patients who feel stressed and they're wired at night, and it's really hard to fall asleep. So there's insomnia, really kind of jittery at night. And then when they wake up in the morning, they're just really tired and it's really hard to get out of bed. Well, for those people, actually that cortisol curve flipped. So it's the other way around.
They have it at the wrong time of day.
They have it at the wrong time of the day. And phosphatidylserine is really good for helping with correcting that curve, putting things back into the circadian rhythm balance.
Any other supplements?
Inositol is another one. Inositol is really good for people with a tendency to OCD.
Very important.
And I do want to mention that OCD is not, people think of that as, oh, the washing of the hands and the checking of the light. OCD can happen also with thoughts. So some people have obsessive thoughts where they think about things that they worry about over and over again. So some people might have had, cancer before, it was cured, and then anytime they have any kind of physical health problem, their mind might go to this illogical place that I have cancer. And they start to think these obsessive thoughts that they just can't get rid of in the brain. And that's kind of a form of OCD that many people are not aware of.
And inositol helps with that?
And inositol is really good for that.
But if they go into a health food store, they can buy inositol.
They can buy it.
So I'm actually thinking of another type of product people can get in a health food store. There are things called cell salts. And they're minerals that the body needs, like magnesium, which is very calming. They're very slightly homeopathically energized minerals, and the homeopathic process means that the body recognizes them, knows what to do with them, knows how to absorb them, and knows how to use them. So it's like there's kind of an information that goes along with the mineral that tells the body what to do. And there are 5 of them that are especially good for the nervous system. So different companies have made formulas called something like Nerve Tonic, really inexpensive and easy to take. They dissolve in the mouth, and they have the effect of, when people will say, my nerves are fried, I'm frazzled, I'm jangled, my nerves are shot, that kind of feeling, Nerve Tonic is very good for that. It might not work on the spot, but it works over time to soothe, strengthen, and support the nerves. And again, there are different companies that make this type of thing that blend different cell salts for the nerves.
That's wonderful. They've worked really well for some people.
Yeah. And then there's also, there are calming herbs, which I think we could talk about it in a minute, and people can get those also in homeopathic form, blended together in a form that might be called calming or something. That it's a very gentle, subtle way to take in the calming herbs, which are
some of the calming herbs that are really gentle that babies can even use would be chamomile. So you can have chamomile as tea, and that's not only soothing to the nervous system but also the stomach. And one other one that goes along really well is called lemon balm. Some people call it by the Latin name Melissa, so that's pretty famous, but they're the same thing. And lemon balm, the herb looks like a mint leaf. So if you grow lemon balm, it has kind of a lemony, minty flavor. It's really nice. And that's, again, really good for the tea. Very safe also. You can use it for children. Teas are really good. Sometimes there's a lot of combination teas with both the chamomile and the lemon balm. Sometimes they mix in some lavender, and you can kind of find what it is that you like. And if you're using it for a medicinal purpose, you might want to do 2 tea bags instead of 1 and have it a little bit more concentrated. Lemon balm, sometimes I also take as a supplement in combination with some other herbs. And that seems to have kind of a gentle, soothing effect. It doesn't really make people drowsy or tired. It just kind of grounds a little bit more. If we go to a stronger herb such as valerian, that one has a little stronger calming effect, and that's something with different people, they react differently. Some people get sleepy, so we don't really recommend trying valerian for the first time if you're going to drive and operate a car. Some people who are really wired don't even feel sleepy at all from valerian, so it's just different. You should pay attention to your body.
And some people actually feel the next morning they can feel a little groggy or almost like they have a hangover or something. I've had people tell me that after taking valerian.
Another herb that's really nice is lavender.
Lavender, yeah.
So lavender, you can even get a bottle of it as aromatherapy and take a sniff of it. And I've even tried myself using aromatherapy on the spot, and you would not think that it works because it's through the nose and it's not oral, and
no, it works really fast through the nose.
But it actually works really fast through the nose.
Yeah, because it's like one neuron from the surface of the nose, the inside of the nose, right into this back part of the brain that's like connected with the emotional part of the brain. It just goes one neuron straight into the brain, and so it can have a very quick result.
It can have a very quick neurological effect.
If people like the idea of aromatherapy, they can go to a health food store, and a large health food store will have testers where they can sniff different ones, because people like the smell of different things. There might be other ones that they like the smell of. I happen to like the pine scent. I find that very calming. So a lot of my clients like that. Yeah.
Now, if people are in shock and anxiety, sometimes if they just feel shocked all of a sudden, like you heard bad news, and you're just kind of in this fear paralysis state, orange is really good as an essential oil to smell.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Sometimes with anxiety, I find that there are different profiles. So some people are very stressed and they're not grounded, as if the energy's all up here and circulating, and if they're really wired at night and they cannot calm down and they kind of feel jittery, that would be one profile. So there are all these different types, and it's so important to know and to be very specific about it. But with that kind of type, there's a Chinese herb called Rehmannia. And Rehmannia is just very soothing, very grounding, very nourishing. It's also really good for people who might have some adrenal fatigue because it also nourishes the adrenal system. So that's one. Now, some people, when they're anxious, they also have liver fire. So in Chinese medicine, liver fire, you can think of Western medicine as maybe some toxicity. So toxic to the point where you're kind of wanting to do a cleanse or detox. It doesn't necessarily mean that your liver is failing, that you go to your doctor and the liver enzymes are high. So your liver enzymes can be normal and you can still be a little bit more toxic and do that. But a lot of the toxins will cause more heat in the liver. And the Chinese say that always heat rises, so the liver fire rises. And in Chinese medicine, a lot of the organs are associated with different emotions. So the liver is associated with anger and frustration.
So people get irritable when their livers are congested.
Yes.
Isn't there an old word, liverish? When people are getting liverish, they're getting irritable.
So our liver fire people, they're irritable. So if you're kind of stressed and just angry, irritable, there's some other herbs for it, and there's one called Buplurum. Buplurum really has that energetic quality to kind of soothe the irritability along with calming. The kidneys have to do with fear. So some people are anxious and they have a lot of fear as well. So the kidneys are the organs behind your back here, and the adrenals sit on top of it. So sometimes we might want to really nourish the adrenals when we're looking at a lot of fear.
And what's interesting is that 5,000 years ago when Chinese medicine was developed, they didn't know how to test the neurotransmitters, but they knew that people were anxious or stressed in different ways, that people had different profiles.
They did.
They used a different word for it,
yes,
but they had the same concept. And actually, in my own field of homeopathy, which is a kind of natural medicine, we have the same concept that people have different patterns or different profiles of how they're stressed. And when you were talking about liver fire, I was thinking about a very stressed type of person, the Nux vomica person. Nux vomica, you can tell by the name, is used a lot for GI problems. I call it the heartburn to hemorrhoids remedy, the whole GI tract. But the kind of person who needs it tends to be stressed because they're very ambitious, they're very competitive, they're usually a business person, they want to make a lot of money, they want to be at the desk many hours a day, they're a workaholic, and then they're stimulating themselves with things like, it could be cigarettes, caffeine, spicy food, junky food, it could be street drugs or other drugs, they could be taking, ADHD drugs. Anyway, they're stimulating themselves as workaholics to keep working, but in the process, they're totally trashing their liver, so they're getting irritable. So the remedy Nux vomica is very helpful to calm them down. It can actually help detoxify the liver, as can milk thistle, which is one of our favorite herbs for detoxing the liver. And it also might help this kind of person to kind of take a step back and take a deep breath and look around and say, wait a minute, my kids are small. Maybe I don't need to spend quite so many hours at my desk. Maybe I can take a few hours off and play with my kids, or, try to see their life in a different framework.
Yeah.
So that would be one type. And then another very common type of person who needs a homeopathic stress medicine is called arsenicum. And arsenicum is the hypochondriac. There are people who are, you talked about OCD, about health problems. There are people who are constantly fretting over their health and imagining or exaggerating their different health problems. They may also be very worried about their survival, whether they'll have a roof over their head, whether they'll have enough money. This is a kind of person, they might be home for a day with the flu, and while they're home, they're thinking, oh my God, what happens if I can't go into work tomorrow? I might lose my job, and if I lose my job, I can't pay my mortgage, and I can't pay my mortgage, I'm going to be homeless. It's like they went straight from one day in bed with the flu to homeless out on the street in about 5 minutes. And they're the person they'll go doctor shopping from a holistic doctor to a regular doctor to another type of practitioner. They'll have this huge medical file. They'll be accumulating all these supplements and taking all these different things because they're so over-focused and over-fretting about their health. Arsenicum is great for people like this because it's actually a medicine for something like the flu, but it's also for all that anxiety. What a waste of energy to be worrying that much when you need your energy for healing. And then there's another type of very, very worried, a very worried type of person, Argentum nitricum, and that's called the what if remedy. This is the person that's constantly spinning out scenarios like, well, what if this goes wrong? And what if that goes wrong? And what if this goes wrong? And what if that goes wrong? And then they have a very vivid imagination, and they go from thinking, what would happen if I stuck this fork in this electric socket, to thinking, oh my God, I'm about to stick the fork in the electric socket. It's like they almost have this this impulse to do the thing that they're most afraid of. They're terrified of bridges, or terrified of heights, or terrified of elevators. And the way their body expresses all this is by having diarrhea. So they're terrified of not being able to find a bathroom. They may become shut-ins because they want to know if they go out of the house exactly where every bathroom is. So argentum nitricum is great for the diarrhea and for all this worrying. There's another type, gelsemium. This is for people or for animals. We use it for animals that have fear of going to the vet, and they get very trembly when you try to get them into the cat carrier or dog carrier. But it's also people who get kind of weak in the knees when they have to give a speech, for example, fear of public speaking, or this, very acute anxiety with an internal sense of trembling. Gelsemium is great for that. Another one where the person can be, just by the nature of their personality, they can be anxious, the phosphorus type. And this is actually a much beloved type in homeopathy. Yeah. Because they're very sociable, very outgoing, very friendly, warm, lovely, and actually often physically very beautiful. Homeopaths think that all the movie stars are phosphoruses with big, beautiful eyes and big, wide smiles and these tall, willowy figures. But every type has its strengths, and it also has its weakness. So phosphorus types are very permeable. They call themselves sponges for all the energies around them, so they pick up on anything that anybody is anxious about near them. They're also very creative and very imaginative, which is good. But if they hear something on the news, let's say, they're very suggestible. So they hear maybe someone's child was kidnapped, then immediately their vivid imagination takes over and they think their child will be kidnapped. So they have, they're elaborating and exaggerating all these fears, and phosphorus can just calm them right down. And by the way, it's great for animals that are afraid of thunder and lightning. Phosphorus is great for that. And one other one I'll mention, causticum, which is so great for OCD. This is the compulsive checking remedy. And it's also good for people with anxiety, specifically about family members. So the people who are very worried perhaps about an ill family member. And this person may also have a very kind of rigid sense of right and wrong, justice and injustice. And they may be very involved in some cause, some good cause, which is good. But they may be overly rigid and overly anxious and overly worried about a family member and express that with a lot of checking behavior. So I'm thinking that all my clients with OCD, I'm going to have them take inositol, as well as maybe causticum or whatever remedy matches them.